All right, hello, fifth graders. This is the last day of our reading for Explorers, Triumphs, and Troubles. We're going to be reading the part about Australia. I know that you are also completing those worksheets in the packets that go along with them, and they mostly go along with each country section, although some of the page numbers are a little bit different. But if you follow along with our country sections, it should make sense to you with the packets. All right. We are going to we're going to think about some things before we start reading. So things to think about while reading the Australia portion. What is different about the expeditions in Australia when compared with the expeditions in the other areas? We've already noticed a lot of difference between some of the different areas, such as the Americas and Antarctica when there are the different expeditions. What motivated, or what made them want to, what motivated the British to attempt to claim Australia? And what were some of the consequences of bad things that happened when the British came to Australia? Vocabulary. Fleet is a word for a group of ships. Mutiny is when a group of people overthrow a leader. And decimated means destroyed. All right, so let's just get right started in our reading. It's a bit of a longer one today, so I want you to be thinking about the things that we just discussed, because we will come back and review them at the end. All right, Australia, the first fleet. On January 26, 1788, a group of Eora people from Australia woke up to see 11 ships in the bay where they lived. This was unusual, as ships rarely pass through the bay. Also think about how far away Australia is from some other countries. A welcome landfall. The people aboard the ships, which we now call the First Fleet, must have been very pleased to arrive. The journey from Britain to Australia had taken 250 days. They had endured storms, shortages of food and water, and even a mutiny. Remember, that's when someone is overthrown on a ship. So the leader was no longer the leader anymore. Were the British right to claim Australia? When the British arrived in Australia, they decided the land was legally terra nullius, Latin for no one's land. They thought this allowed them to claim the territory for Britain. Do you think this was right? Think about that. The British settlement. The new arrivals quickly began to put up tents and then to build roads, fences, and houses. The settlements would have looked strange to the Eora, who lived, dressed, and used the land differently than the Europeans. The Europeans thought they would come to Eora's country and settle there, but the land belonged to the Eora. Claiming Australia. The British knew before they arrived that people already lived in Australia, because another famous explorer, Captain James Cook, had already reached the coastline of eastern Australia in 1770 and made contact with the people who lived there. We now call these people Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. However, the British also knew that there was no government, army, or police force, so they decided to claim the land as their own. Here, you can see the very, very long journey that they had to take all the way to the side of Australia. I'm wondering why they chose to come to this side when this side of Australia would be closer. All right, journey fact file. Dates 1787 to 1788. There were 11 ships in the fleet. There were around 1,480 passengers and crew. Wow. The 8 months at sea. Dangers, storms, shipwreck, fire aboard the ship, sicknesses, thirst, and hunger. Think about how some of those are similar and different to the dangers of the other expeditions. Conflict arises. At first, the British and the Eora people did not fight, but soon they were in conflict. The Eora people had lived on the land for centuries and respected the land, taking only what they needed and managing it well. The British fenced off large areas of the Eora people's land, which prevented them from crossing it. By 1790, many Eora were frustrated with the new arrivals. The local leader, named Pemulwuy, began a series of attacks against the British and became a great hero to many Eora. The conflict lasted until Pemulwuy was killed in 1802. This picture. Wanted, Pumaway, charged with the murder of John McIntyre, the governor's huntsman, and many other white men. Raiding, means attacking, and setting fire to the government farm at Toongabbie, leading 100 warriors into Parramatta town, and other heinous crimes, which means horrible, too many to list. Alright, think about these two perspectives again. Triumph. The arrival of the first fleet was the start of the European settlement in Australia. Since then, Australia has become a wealthy modern nation. Its people are from European, Asian, and other backgrounds, and they all share in the country's success. Or trouble. The arrival of the British was devastating for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. 2 years after the British arrived, up to 70% of Eora had died from smallpox. In the next 100 years, the total number of Indigenous Australians dropped from roughly 1 million to 60,000. Today, Indigenous Australians make up about 3% of the population. For the most part, they have not shared in Australia's modern wealth, and they were among the country's poorest people. Alright, it's another expedition that happened in Australia. Let's read about it a little bit later. Burke and Wills. On August 20th, 1860, crowds cheered as the Victorian exploring expedition left Royal Park in Melbourne, Australia. The explorers were aiming to make the first ever crossing of Australia from south to north. Robert Burke and his second-in-command, William Wills, led the expedition. I think we forget sometimes how big the country of Australia is. Was Burke the right leader? Burke had been an officer in the Australian Army and the police, so he was a trained leader. He had no experience as an explorer, though, and Burke was famous for getting lost even in his hometown. Terrible conditions. Conditions for the explorers were terrible. It was extremely hot in the day and freezing at night. Tiny black flies got in their noses, mouth, ears, and even their eyes. Rats nibbled the explorers' toes at night, and there were scorpions, venomous snakes, and mosquitoes. The expedition was also weighed down by more than 20 tons of equipment, including useless items such as a Chinese gong and a heavy dining table. The explorers struggled to cover 18 miles. After 3 months, the exhausted explorers reached Cooper's Creek, not even halfway to the north coast. This was the traditional territory of the Yonderawanda people. The explorers set up camp. They used as much of the creek's precious water as they liked, and they let their animals dirty the stream so that anyone farther down could not use it. But the Yonderawanda people did not complain. They could see the explorers were exhausted and needed to recover. The Yonderawanda even brought them gifts of fish and other food. Journey fact file. Dates: 1860 to 1861. Distance roughly 2,020 miles. That's a ton. From coast to coast. Dangers: heat, cold, thirst, hunger, venomous animals. Number of explorers: 19. More than 600 people applied to take part. Weight of supplies: at first about 20 tons. Transport: mainly camels. The expedition started with wagons, but these broke down on the first day. Australia. On to the north coast. After a month at Cooper's Creek, Burke set off for the north coast with William Wills, John King, and Charles Gray. The others were told to wait 3 months at Cooper's Creek for their return. By February 1861, the 4 men had gotten within 3 miles of the north coast. Mangrove swamps blocked their way, and they turned back. Gray, who was exhausted, died on the way home, and when the others finally stumbled into camp at Cooper's Creek, they found the rest of the expedition had left that morning. See the map here? The deaths of Burke and Wills. The 3 remaining explorers now survived partly on food that had been buried by the rest of the expedition before they left. They had left instructions on a tree about where the supplies were buried. This is known as the dig tree. When the supplies ran low, the explorers were given food by the Yonderawanda. One day, Burke feared the Yonderawanda would steal expedition property, and he drove them off with a pistol shot. They did not return. Burke and Wills both died on about June 30th, and the only survivor of the expedition was King, who was looked over after by Yonderawanda. Triumph. Burke, Wills, and King reached within 3 miles of the north coast. If they had returned to Cooper's Creek just a few hours earlier, the rest of the expedition would still have been there and they would have been able to make it back to Melbourne alive. Or Trouble. Burke put his ambition to make history ahead of the safety of his men. He also treated the Yonderwanda with contempt. He used water from Cooper's Creek, camped on their territory, and took their food, then shot at them. Even then, the Yonderwanda looked after King until the search party arrived. Alright, we have finished reading about Australia, and this is our last couple pages of the book. I want you to do some reflection, thinking about what you think about the book and some of the major themes and some of the facts that you might remember. Explorers, triumphs or troubles. Many explorers became heroes back at home, sometimes even if they failed. Scott of the Antarctic is a hero to many British people, despite reaching the South Pole after his rival and then dying with all his men on the way back. But were explorers of the past really heroes? Here we're looking at both sides again. Triumphs. Exploration brought many countries great wealth. Spain, for example, became Europe's richest nation because of the treasure from its territories in the Americas. Each year, a treasure fleet brought gold, silver, jewels, pearls, and other valuables back to Spain. Triumphs. Territory. Exploration allowed countries to expand their territory. Explorers paved the way from Britain to occupy lands in Africa, Asia, and Australia, for example. These new territories provided Britain with raw materials such as rubber and oil, and they were also places to sell British goods. Here you see this is an older type ad. Do you know that the colonies produce over half the world's rubber and a third of the tin, and they are rich in sugar, tea, coffee, cocoa, and fruits. The colonial copper, gold, and oil are increasingly important. Alright, let's think about the other side. Troubles, land thieves. The lands explorers found already belonged to other people. They occupied the lands without permission, often by force. Sometimes the explorers enslaved the local people, and the wealth they sent home was not theirs to take. Troubles, spreaders of disease. Explorers often brought new diseases with them. Millions of people died as a result. In many places, these diseases decimated the local population. Decimated means destroyed. To the people whose lands they reached, many explorers were definitely not heroes. At the time, few explorers thought they were doing anything wrong. For example, they did not know their diseases would kill millions. But does that make it acceptable? What do you think? Can we judge the triumphs and troubles of explorers based on things we know, but they did not? Think about that. Before I end this, we go back to our slides for a moment. And I want you to think about what is one thing you learned from reading this book, and think of a few themes or facts that you can take away and remember from reading this book. All right, great job, you guys. Looking forward to seeing all your answers and work. Keep it up.